WNEO Alliance and WEAO Akron.
What action can the United States take to prevent further bloodshed in South Africa? This person ought to know. Born Indianapolis, 54 years of age. Wife Charlene, 29 years, 4 sons. Methodist, lay speaker. Denison University, Bachelor of Arts, Economics, Phi Beta Kappa. Oxford University, Rhodes Scholar, M.A., Politics, Philosophy, and Economics. U.S. Naval Intelligence, Lieutenant, 3 years. Thomas L. Green and Company, Vice President, Treasurer, and President, 18 years. Lugar Stock Farm, 600 acres, Treasurer, 18 years. Indianapolis, Mayor, 8 years. Republican National Convention, Keynote Speaker, 1972. U.S. Senate, 9 years and currently. National Republican Senatorial Committee, Chairman, 2 years. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Chairman, 1.5 years and currently. Philippines, presidential elections, special delegation sent by President Reagan to observe, Chairman of.
I think Mrs. Aquino has been very impressive in her ability.
Americans for Democratic Action, ADA, premier liberal rating system. Out of a perfect liberal 100, 5, 1985, career, 12. Net worth, $600,000 roughly. Long distance runner, arguably the fastest in the U.S. Congress. Richard Green Lugar. It's one-on-one.
From Washington, D.C., John McLaughlin's One-on-One, an unrehearsed probing inside exchange with the people making the news. Here's the host, John McLaughlin.
Who can run faster than you in the U.S. Congress?
Senator Max Baucus of Montana is faster. Jay Garn.
Tell Baucus he can run.
When he was doing the space business, it's pretty tough, too.
How about Cranston?
No, he's strictly a 50-yard dash man.
Anybody in the House side run faster than
Oh, yes.
Lots
of young people.
You're not into karate the way some of those House members are.
No, I haven't gotten to that.
Let's talk about SALT II, Senator. Ronald Reagan said several weeks ago, that he no longer feels bound by SALT II. In addition to that, Schultz said the treaty is obsolete. Yet the Senate has put together a resolution urging the president to obey it. And I'm wondering where you stand on all this.
Well, the president and Schultz are correct. The treaty really is not relevant, and the president's stance is to reduce nuclear weapons. I think the Senate resolution comes from the fact that many members of the Senate are mistrustful of the president's interest in arms control, have been from the beginning, and feel that if we don't get an arms control treaty, we ought not to throw away the props, even of one that has run out of time and was never ratified.
Senator Helms says, look, if the people in the Senate want SALT II, why don't we vote on it? See if we can ratify it. He wants to call their bluff. What do you think about that idea?
Well, it's an interesting debating ploy, and we have it in front of the Foreign Relations Committee now. The problem is that there might be senators in our committee who would say, let's do ratify it, send it out of the committee with an affirmative vote onto the floor, and I don't think it has a 2/3 vote. It might have a majority vote, but I think it clouds the whole issue. We shouldn't be debating SALT II, which, after all, is simply run out of time.
You're going to let that... what are you going to do? What's your course of action? Are you going to let that resolution come out of committee? You're going to not the resolution, but whatever Helms wants to do come out of committee?
Not necessarily. I think we've got to see whether on the floor of the Senate people want to have it. They can discharge the committee and take it away from us so that it's not our call entirely. I think we've got to try to come to some agreement within the committee as to how to handle it expeditiously, and as a part of what I think will be the armed services battle that's coming up, it would be attached to that situation.
With regard to the conditions that the Russians would like to see fulfilled, one of them is an extension of the ABM treaty for about 15 years. Where do you stand on that idea?
Well, I wouldn't want to extend it for 15 years. I think it's a part of the general negotiations on the Strategic Defense Initiative on SDI. Clearly, our ability to be able to use SDI is contingent upon the ABM treaty ending up at some point.
Would you say that it would be a good idea to extend it for 5 years?
Not necessarily. I want to see how we come out in Geneva. I think this is all a part of the negotiating process. that we're in Geneva, I think is important. And to get into these pronouncements on SALT II or ABM, what have you, are irrelevant.
It's clear that the Soviets want some concessions from Ronald Reagan on SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. And it's clear that one of those is that extension of the ABM. And you say it is part of, which sounds to me like you approve of the SDI being on the negotiating table. Is that correct?
I don't approve of SDI being on the table to be eliminated. I think SDI is being discussed, and it's being discussed because we want to discuss it, and because that is the impelling reason why the Soviets, in my judgment, are taking the whole process seriously.
The SDI is the big lever that pushed them to the table.
I believe so.
Well, let me ask you this question. What can the President give away regarding the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, without losing really anything?
Essentially, the President would affirm that we're going to continue research on Star Wars, and the Soviets would affirm that they understand that's correct, too. They probably would try to bargain for some less intensity of movement. In other words, instead of accelerating the research and testing and deployment, the Soviets would try to get us to get this thing slowed down in return for giving up heavy weapons.
You know that the President wanted about $4.8 billion for the Strategic Defense Initiative. That's his strategic darling. 48 senators, led by the esteemed Sam Nunn, wrote him a letter and said it should be cut back to $3.2 billion. That's over 1/4 of the President's requested budget for the SDI. Do you think that the action taken by those senators was an enlightened action in wanting to cut back the SDI?
No, it was not. And I without briefing for Sam Nunn, I doubt whether he would want it cut back very much either. My thought generally is that it's the technological breakout possibilities we have, our technical abilities that have the Soviets in awe, and this is the reason they want to negotiate, to in any way take away that possibility is to weaken our possibilities to negotiate an arms control treaty or for that matter, the respect to the Soviets generally.
Well, let me ask you this question with regard to general East-West relations, Moscow-Washington relations. A summit was held about, 8 months ago in last fall. And after that summit, you had this to say, and I'd like you to tell me whether you still agree with what you said then.
Chemistry is different now, and that is significant.
Is the chemistry different, as far as you can see, between the Soviet Union and the United States?
Yes, I think so. I think there were two things that came out of that meeting, and those were to move toward reduction of weapons, generally nuclear weapons, and to try to get into a theater nuclear agreement of sorts. We've moved on both of those counts. The Soviets apparently have made some proposals that are interesting.
But aren't they really just as rigid as ever? For example, they want a done deal before the summit, number one. Number two, the President wants general agenda, and they want arms control agenda. Number three, we're playing this minuet with them, or they with us, as to the time of the meeting and the date of the meeting. I don't think, it doesn't at least appear that the chemistry is really different. Is it different?
Well, the preliminaries are always the same. They will try to get an agenda and a setting which is favorable to them. Clearly, we will want to do that. I don't see anything unusual about that situation. When I say the chemistry is different, I mean that there is a willingness on their part, perhaps even an eagerness to talk, to get on with certain agendas. I think that is different.
Is there any doubt in your mind that the summit will take place this year in the United States as planned?
I think it will occur in the United States. I think it will happen as it was always going to happen in the winter of this year.
And you have no doubt that it will take place?
I have no doubt about that. I don't think I ever had any doubt that it would happen in the winter. After all the preliminaries are over, the facts are that the Soviets want to talk for various reasons. We want to talk. This accommodates both sides. Our elections are over. They really weren't prepared, apparently. They had a heavy domestic agenda. They're getting ready.
Final question. What's your intuition as to what Ronald Reagan is going to give away? And this goes back to the other point with regard to the Strategic Defense Initiative. Do you think that he's going to give away precisely this, an extension of any length of time of the ABM treaty?
No, I don't have that idea in mind at all. I don't see any giveaways.
Do you have any? What is your intuition of what he's going to do? Do you think he could conceivably do something like that?
No, I think that he will stay with the SDI situation. I think that is constant, and then he understands that that's basically where this country is headed.
Senator, the House recently voted in favor of Ronald Reagan's request for $100 million in aid to the Contras, the Democratic resistance fighters who are trying to induce the Sandinistas, minimally that is, to be more democratic in their rule. This matter is now going to go where?
Well, it'll be taken up, I suspect, in the Appropriations Committee of the Senate. There's a strange matchup now in a parliamentary way because the House passed on an appropriation bill. Senator Hatfield's appropriation chairman of the Senate, and he'll have to deal with it in the comparable bill on the Senate side.
Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts says he's going to filibuster any legislation which awards funds for the Contras. How do you feel about that filibuster?